Okay, got it. Let's start. We are still doing MDI 007. Give me a sec. There is a particular way it has to be done. Share screen. Okay, so we are now on Unit 9, the Keynesian theory of wages and employment. Uh, uh, you also need to understand in the economic theories thing, specifically what I've been talking about. There's a context to everything. In fact, in academics and scholarly pursuit, also understand the context to anything which has been said by a scholar or a writer or a philosopher. There is always a context to it. And unless the context is understood, it's very difficult to understand why things happened at a particular time. For example, the uh, Keynesian theory came about during the time when there was a Great Depression worldwide. So we will talk about that. But before we go on that, I just wanted to do a recap of whatever we have done till now, because there are various people who have joined at various times during this particular MDI 007 that I've been teaching. Again, those who are joining for the first time or as a repetition, you can stop me at any moment of time to add something which you know better, or you have experienced with, or you can stop me at any moment of time to ask question by raising a hand or just interrupting. There is no protocol in terms of anything to wait or anything. So let's just quickly do a recap. Definition of labor. Labor is both physical and intellectual. More often than not, we understand labor as physical, people who do physical, but labor in a holistic approach is both manual or intellectual, is defined as labor. Labor in economics is not a commodity in the same sense as other inputs. Cannot be bought and sold. Rather, the services of a worker can be hired or rented out. Labor cannot be separated from the human being, and that's what makes labor totally different from the other inputs like land, machinery, capital, etc. Then classical economics is based on concept called laissez-faire, which is non-interference by government. In fact, you will hear the term classical economics and neoliberalism. In fact, in economics, there is also a term neoliberalism, which also goes back into non-interference by government. So a lot of economists believe that the government should not. In fact, politicians tend to use this term very often. The government should not intervene. It has two particular laws, says law of market, and classical like neo-liberal economy talks about supply demand. One of the reason also you need to understand this supply demand was the whole subject of economics came around the time of industrial revolution, where there was a supply side, there was a demand side. People had, the topic of economics was coming in, globalization was coming about. There's a sales laws of market, and there's a wage price flexibility and full employment. Again, let me reiterate the reason why this whole MDI 007 is about economics and labor is because in migration, whenever we study migration, a large part of migration is economic related. And people move in search of employment, in search of a better life. There is an economic angle to it. And then, so the study of migration and diaspora, if you do not understand how economics functions or how labor movement happens, your understanding of the whole subject might be a little skewed. So wage price flexibility and full employment. Marx was a deviant in the sense of the way economics was flowing in. Marx understood capitalism. In fact, they say that Marx economic theory actually went on to become a social theory, the whole concept of communism or socialism, as they say, came out of Marx economic theory. Earlier, economists were also called philosophers. It was Keynes who started bringing economics into a scholarly discipline. Marx located labor within capitalism. Labor is one of the key elements in Marx theory. Labor is understood as a process, interacts with the physical world. So that's how Marx came about. Then came the neoclassical economics, which is something similar, like classical economics of supply and demand, but in neoclassical, prices should be based on how consumers perceive the value of the product. They also believe that consumers make rational decisions to maximize utility. Subsequently, remember, these things have been debunked in a sense that consumers are not rational entities. There is something more than supply demand, but this is how the theories evolve. Also, as I keep telling you, theories have a context, why a particular theory happened at a particular time. Then subsequently, the economists also understood, and everybody was understanding the fact that labor was, you cannot separate labor from the human beings. And obviously, the human beings function in an institutional approach. Institutions are nothing but laws, regulation, organization, practice. They shape labor markets, influence economic development. There are formal institutions, there are informal institutions. So that's how economics and labor evolved. And we come to the Keynesian theory of wages and employment. Keynesian came about the time when, as I said, during the 30s, there was a Great Depression. The World War One had ended. The World War Two had not started, but there was this Great Depression. And we will talk about what is depression. So learn about the Great Depression, uh, Keynesian theory of wage and employment, aggregate demand and supply. Now, unemployment was a problem that concerns policymakers across the country. So the classical and the neoclassical talked about supply and demand. And they also talked about that involuntarily there would be no unemployment. If you let the markets function without any interference by the government, the supply and demand will take care of your unemployment. But unemployment still was a problem. It was there, had to be an important policy measure. Laissez-faire talked about non-government intervention, but Keynes was the economist who now talked about the government's need to interfere or intervene in the economic setup. The classical theory of economics emphasized that supply creates its own demand. So this was a step out of the supply-demand scenario. Unemployment, if any existence, was due to market failure. The theories provided no solutions to the problem arising out of business cycles. And also understand, in the world, everything is cyclic, climate, seasons, like waves. Similarly, business is cyclic. There is a high and then there is a bust. So, and across the world, this is how business cycles run. No solution to the problem arising out of the business cycle as such during the period of the Great Depression of the 30s. So what was this Great Depression? Let's look at the Great Depression. Severe global economic downturn from 29 to 39. World War One had ended. World War Two had still not started. Affected many countries, decline in stock prices in the US, largest economy of the world, leading period to economic depression, Wall Street crash, what was called Black Tuesday. In fact, there are these photographs of people jumping to their deaths from Wall Street when the Wall Street stock market crashed. Start of a prolonged period of economic hardship, high employment rates, widespread business failure, falling personal income, tax. And because everything is linked, it's almost like a domino effect. Construction was virtually halted. Farming communities and rural areas suffered as crop prices fell. There was an all-round destruction which happened. That was the Great Depression. In fact, in case you want to read a little bit about the Great Depression, you can always Google it. always, and a mark of caution, always cross-check your sources because internet is a great source for misinformation. The classical economists supported their argument that situation of full employment would be restored by the market automatically because supply, demand, and non-interference by the government would automatically adjust things. In a classical model, market is self-regulating. Would not be a characteristic. If it exists, it would be a temporary phenomena. But this Great Depression lasted 10 years. So inevitably, there are these new terms called recession and depression. Recession is supposed to be a short term, depression is a longish term, and they could not, the classical economists could not explain this phenomenon. Hang on. My mouse, what happened to this mouse? Sorry. Problem with the keyboard. Apologies. Okay. And the classical economists could not explain this Great Depression in terms of the supply and demand and market correcting itself. And then came the Keynesian premises, which said that market does not have any self-regulating automatic mechanism. So it was a deviation from the basic supply-demand model. Inflation and employment are results of disturbance in the basic fundamental decisions of the economy. External factors that called economic. Basically, business cycles are in form of waves. There are cyclic in business, and inevitably the market does not have a self-regulating mechanism. Imperfections in the market, several obstacles which do not allow flexibility in wages and prices. Low income of workers would only result in low spending on consumption of goods. And then all these becomes dominoes. So, employment, wages, the economic downturn will keep the output and employment low. Decline in prices and wages will will result in further unemployment. And as I said, all these work as dominoes. So does the government still let the supply and demand control? But if that happens, then the economy of a country goes spirals down. In fact, if you would be reading the news, there are so many countries which are right now in severe, economic hardship. There are, I was seeing this video about how 10 countries are in serious trouble of actually going bust. So Keynesian premises talks about effective demand in economy is an important determinant of employment. We will look at what is this effective demand. So Keynesian premises talks about effective demand. They are talking about effective supply. Then there are two new terms they introduce, which is called fiscal policy and monetary policy. In fact, you will hear these terms a lot of times whenever financial news is spoken about or you read financial news. Fiscal policy and monetary policy. I'll basically touch on that. What is fiscal? What is monetary? Again, as I said, all these things are concepts that you need to be aware about when you're talking about migration and diaspora. Maybe an equilibrium at any level of employment, and that full employment can only be a temp. In fact, Keynesian talks about the fact that full employment can only be a temporary phenomena. Classical and neoclassical talked about that. Market will make sure that there is full employment in a way, which may even lack of aggregate demand is a cause of unemployment in economy. We look at what is aggregate demand. Immediate reaction to a decline in aggregate demand would be decline in output and employment, bringing wage and price adjustment. And so the fulcrum is the aggregate demand. And how does this aggregate demand come in? Let's look at what is aggregate demand. Government spending is important in helping raising aggregate demand. Thus, government can and should adopt policy. So inevitably, the policy measure was government intervention into the economic market to manage aggregate demand, thereby provide improving the level of employment. So the question is, what is aggregate demand? This is aggregate demand. Amount of goods and services demanded at a given price. It shows the level of consumption at a given output income level. Proceeds that producers actually expect to get at a given level of employment. Changes in the level of employment, income would also change, and therefore the demand for goods will also change. Look at the fact when you move from one job into another job and your salary increases, your aggregate demand will also increase in terms of what do you want to buy now, because now you have the income to buy. So this is aggregate demand. And in fact, I was picking up this October 21st, just last month, article in terms of India's demand slowdown temporary festival season to aid central bank says in a bulletin. And if you notice, aggregate demand in India is likely to shrug off the temporary slowdown in momentum. They use the term aggregate demand. So now you know what an aggregate demand is, amount of goods and services demanded at a given price. And if the aggregate demand, so when we hear a news item which says that the automobile manufacturers have accrued a inventory which is equivalent to 79,000 crores, which is unsold inventory, it clearly shows that the aggregate demand has fallen. And if the aggregate demand has fallen, that means the economy is not doing well. Plays a significant role in determination of employment. According to Keynes, there are four components of aggregate. The aggregate demand itself has four components, and let's look at what are the four components. Consumption demand, investment demand, demand by the government sector, and net exports. And as I said, economic works in a domino principle. So if one component starts failing, if there is no corrective mechanism in the other components, they'll all start failing. And if you notice, there is a slowdown in consumption. The slowdown in consumption is because there is currently a high unemployment. And a very simple factor to find out unemployment is to go to your nearby labor chalk and see the number of people who are standing there for work. Consumption demand is determined by the propensity to consume and the disposable income. Disposable income is the income available to households after paying taxes. A part of this income is saved and the rest is used for consumption purposes. Thus, income will be equal to consumption plus saving. That is how most individuals function. By far, though a lot of individuals in the current scenario would like to spend rather than save because of various reasons, which could be sociological, which could be psychological, etc. But by far, that is how it functions. Disposable income, household, which is available after paying taxes, part of it is saved, rest is used for consumption purposes. Government expenditure is autonomous and depends on policies rather than income. During recession, when the business expectations are low, government can resort to public spending and taxes. These policy instruments help bring stability. And that is why when government intervenes, there is a stability to the market, to the labor market, to the economic scenario. Remember, economics works on sentiments. So when there is a positive sentiment, the economy is doing well. When there is a negative sentiment, the economy starts doing bad. As income increases, consumption also increases, but not in the same proportion. As income increases, more and more wants of the individuals are satisfied. Therefore, expenditure on consumption decreases proportionally with the rise in income and saving increase. Keynes called it marginal propensity to consume. Similarly, there's a marginal propensity to save. This sounds very, rational and logical, that there is an income coming in after taxes, the initial part of the income. So if as we will go through these diaspora, units, under the units of remittances, when a remittance comes into the country and it is given to a household which is left behind in the home country, the large part of the remittance is spent on basic items like food, clothing, shelter. Whatever after that is left is used for things like marriages and etc. etc. If anything is left after that is saved. And today, when we look at remittances, India is the largest country where largest remittance comes in. That means a large part of the country's population is working outside, sending remittances back home. As income increase, marginal propensity to consume decreases while the propensity to save increase. MPC and MPS. Now, you don't need to remember these concepts, but you need to, the idea is to understand, to, be aware of such concepts and to understand that inevitably, Keynes or Keynesian, economics was a breakaway from the classical economics where supply and demand. And you will understand why then people migrate. Now, if there is not enough employment in the country, then obviously people will look outside. For example, if there is not enough employment in the rural areas, then people will look at the urban areas. If there is not employment in urban areas, then they will look outside. And there are other institutional and other factors by which people decide to migrate. The relationship between income and consumption is explained with the help of consumption function. So if you look at the unit has a lot of mathematical functions. It's got a lot of graphs. I have not put those functions and graphs anywhere. Unless you are an economic student, do not try and grapple with it, because it will become a little dense for you. The idea is to have a macro understanding of the picture to be able to plug in with the larger migration and diaspora flows. Keynes suggested that any initial investment in economy has an impact on income known as a multiplier effect, which is typically the seed capital, what we just say. That whenever, let's say you are in a dire strait, and if somebody gives you some money as a loan, or gives you get a windfall in terms of a lottery or something, that has a multiplier effect. Similarly, remittances have a multiplier effect. So when a person migrates and sends remittances, then those particular households start seeing economic prosperity. We have very interesting examples of internal migration, where people from Orissa, Bihar, or UP, when they migrate, let's say to Tamil Nadu or Kerala, then they are able to send remittances back home. And we have seen how the culture also changes, because now the money comes back home. They are able to, have a pakka home, have cultural influences which come in, and so on and so forth. The multiplier effect. Then there is something called an aggregate supply. Like aggregate demand, there's an aggregate supply, is the value of goods and services produced during a period of time in economy. Depends on the availability of capital, technology, and labor. Now, understand one thing, that's why labor becomes very important, because you might have all the capital and technology, without labor, nothing will work. So for all those people who keep talking about AIs and technologies and computers and everything, remember, at the end of the day, it's the labor which makes or breaks a situation. You might have the best of technology, But unless you have a good quality, well-trained human being which provides labor, the technologies in the capital actually amount to nothing. In a short run analysis, it assumes that stock of capital and technology changes do not take place. Labor is the only factor of production that varies with the level of output. And that's why regular training and movement becomes very important. As output increases, employment will also increase. Therefore, with rise in production, why would employment increase? Because as output is increasing, why would output increase? Because output will only increase when there is a consumption of that output. If there's a consumption of that output, that means the economy is buoyant, the aggregate demand is more. Obviously, more production needs to be done. More production needs to be done means more labor needs to be required. Employment will increase. With rise in production, more labor would be employed. This would be possible when the producers expect to receive higher revenue. Productivity, prices of the products and wages being constant in the short run. So now you need to plan for the short run and the long term, and also understand that the businesses work in cycle, the ups and downs. Causes of involuntary unemployment in economy, rigidity in wage rate. So the wage is by far will remain rigid. In the short term, wages do not adjust with the given demand and supply conditions because of multiple reasons. Classical economy talks about supply and demand and the wages working with that supply and demand. But in actual real case, it does not change because there are trade unions, there is government intervention, employees themselves are not interested in lowering wages, workers themselves may resist. So even in COVID time, a lot of companies decided to reduce wage. There was major discontentment. In fact, companies shed off employees. There was a general, recession, depression, discontentment. A lot of things was happening. In fact, countries like India have still not come out of that COVID-19, recession which happened. Cyclic unemployment and Keynes. Achieving high level of employment and income are important objectives of the policy, emphasize the significance. Now he brings in a term called fiscal policy. In fact, we have heard about this fiscal policy a lot in financial news. Fiscal policy is nothing but the use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions, such as aggregate demand, inflation, and growth. For example, there is a lot of talk about the high level of taxation in India. And seeing the current economy, there is a lot of movement of trying to reduce taxation. For some reason, the government has still not, especially middle class taxation rates are pretty high, as per a lot of conversations that I've been following. So fiscal policy is the use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions, such as aggregate demand, inflation, and growth. And Keynes was particularly, the Keynesian economics is particularly focused on the fiscal policy. They talk about the fiscal policy. During recession, an increase in government expenditure on public work programs helped bring rise in aggregate demand. This in turn will help bring economy out of recession. Alternatively, government can also resort to cutting taxes, which the government keeps doing. So you will hear the term fiscal policy a lot. And that's why, because the Keynes focus on fiscal policy. A cut in personal tax rate, for instance, income tax will result in increasing disposable income, increase in demand for consumption. So, for example, when this news item came on the onset of Diwali that 79,000 crores worth of automobile inventory is there, which clearly shows that the aggregate demand has come down. Now, one of the ways in fiscal policy which the government can do is to cut back on its taxes so that people have more disposable and income, which they would like to spend on, let's say, automobiles. boost aggregate demand, help clear unemployment, bringing the economy out of a recessionary situation. The second term is the monetary policy. In fact, Keynes is against the use of monetary policy, were of the view that monetary policy cannot be an effective instrument. Monetary policy is nothing but a set of tools used by a nation's central bank to control overall money supply and promote economic growth, revising interest rate and changing bank reserve. So if you notice, we let's say in India, we have a lot of again focus on monetary policy. In fact, post Keynes, nations have been focusing a lot on monetary policy than the fiscal policy. You will hear in financial news both these terms, fiscal policy and monetary policy. But more often than not, when an RBI governor comes and gives a press, press briefing, there seems to be a much more news items than on the fiscal policy. This is a post Keynesian effect. Keynesian was of the view that monetary policy cannot be an effective instrument for raising employment levels. Because during recession, business class is pessimistic about returns of investment, increase in money supply would not be effective in bringing the economy out of a recessionary situation. Again, you need to understand every economist or economic scholar or academician, when they bring out a particular formulation, it is contextual, and situations have become much more complicated in terms of how globalizations affect nations' economies. So each one had a particular, there is no, answer for all situations. Nations have to pick up their own policy, economic policy, to figure out what they need to do. Two important fiscal policy prescriptions. Government need not focus on balancing the budget. And we keep hearing during the budget time about budget deficit. Even if public expenditure is higher, there is no cause for concern. For funding of public works program, government can resort to borrowing, which is typically the budget deficit. So a high budget deficit is not, a earth-shattering event. It is a routine practice. Has an important impact on raising aggregate demand during recession. Expenditure interval will have a multiplier effect, give a boost to the economy. So that is why infrastructure like highways, roads, airports, railways boost economy, because they pump, they give employment, they pump money into the economy, have a multiplier effect. So what is public expenditure? Hajela classifies public expenditure into two categories: pump priming and compensatory spending. Let me reiterate. I don't think so. You are expected to remember this definition, terms. The idea is to be aware of these terms so that, when you are explaining about labor movement, you can, talk about them. Having a macro understanding helps you to understand labor movements and helps migration and diaspora. Pump priming refers to the expenditure initially made by the government to give a boost to the economy, reach a stage of stagnation by merely injecting fresh purchasing power to stimulate private investment. That's called pump priming. And what are the examples of pump priming? COVID-19 adopted a number of fiscal and monetary measures that can be seen as pump priming. Cuts in interest rate, implementation of relief programs, distributing stimulus money. For example, US, the government of United States gave every individual and businesses some money. Various others, governments in various countries gave stimulus in terms of checks to people. This is called pump priming. And pump priming comes out from the mechanical engineering term of priming a pump. It's not an economic term, it's a mechanical term. But it's been incorporated in the economic scenario. Cuts in interest rate, various relief program. And then there is compensatory spending, making of the deficiency in private investment, including infrastructure building. It can also take the form of social security benefits. So senior citizen pensions or health card for all, that's a social security benefit, which allows people to save that money and then spend it in consumption. The idea is at any moment of time, you need to give people disposable income for them to spend, because if they spend, consumption will happen, there will be demand, economy will move. The problem typically happens if people have limited amount of money, uh, they will spend it in basic needs, try and save some money, and the aggregate demand goes down. Okay. Post-Keynesian approach. Move away from fiscal policy and emphasize the role of policy. In fact, we've seen across countries that there is a lot of stress on monetary policy rather than fiscal policy. Supply of money is an important factor that has an impact on income and plays a significant role in determination of production and employment in the short term. So that's how that's a post Keynesian approach. So let's sum up. Theory of wages and employment. John Maynard Keynes posits that wages and employment levels are influenced by aggregate demand. Reiterating this theory came up during the Great Depression, 1929 to 39. This was a break from the earlier supply demand or the classical and the neoclassical theories. Keynes was very keen that the government intervene so that US especially he was a US economist, US especially and the rest of the world is able to, and because the US economy was the largest economy, US had already become a superpower and was influenced the global economy, the government needed to intervene. That was his policy formulation. According to the theory, it's demand driven. Employment is primarily determined by aggregate demand of goods and services. Demand is high. Business hire more workers, leading to higher employment. Wages tend to be sticky downward. They do not easily decrease even in the time of economic downturn. Lead to unemployment if firms cannot adjust wages. Role of government. Importance of government interventions to stimulate demand. Advocating for fiscal policies. And again, as I said, Keynes was, the fiscal policy guy and not the monetary policy. And there are in the unit, there are some references. There is a Dillard Dudley on economics of. In fact, there are very interesting videos on YouTube in case you are, keen to understand a little more. There are explanatory videos on YouTube. There are enough explanatory videos. There are video podcasts. Let me stop here. Let me start my video. Hi guys. So as I said, in case you get more interested in economics, there are on YouTube, there are some very easily explained videos. You can get a little more idea. Again, as I said, economics becomes one of the primary determinant factor for migration, and to be able to have a macro viewpoint and understanding of how these all things function allows you to see the larger aspect of why people migrate and how governments need to intervene to make sure that the economy of a country does not spiral out of control, because if these are all dominoes, each event influences the other event. Okay, I am before time. Any questions? I hope I was not very dense. There is somebody called iPad. Could you please rename your connection, whoever this iPad is, or is it somebody holding two, whoever that person is? If there is any questions, as I said, the SLM that you will receive, the self-learning module that you will receive, has a lot of economic mathematical equations and charts. unless you have done, some minor or major in economics, do not get stuck with it, because then it becomes a little denser. And, one would very, struggle hard to figure out why we are reading all this. So I try and, keep it as uh, overview and as simple as possible so that everybody can understand, why we are doing this. And again, as keep repeating, migration, a large part of migration is because of economic considerations. Any questions?
So,
Yes, Gurpreet.
so we spent good time at MPI 007 as labor supply and demand seems to be determinant migration governing factor, sir.
Right.
Sir, other than the labor, sir, that is trade, globalization, ICT, which is another major factor, primary factor other than the labor.
Gurpreet, there are multiple factors by which migration happens. Political uncertainty becomes a important factor. Climate change becomes a very important factor. Natural calamities become an important factor. There are so many factors which leads to migration, but underlying all these becomes economics, because at the end of the day, for human survival, you need, specifically in a modern economy, you need money. You cannot barter things.
Sir,
So you would need money, and for money, you would need employment, or you would need to produce something. And obviously, as a country's economy moves from the traditional to the modern, whereby in the traditional things, people used to produce their own stuff. And then, they would either sell it or barter it. In a modern thing, everything is produced outside. So in an urban setup, we are hardly producing anything. Everything is produced somewhere else and we buy it. For buying it, we need money. For money, we need employment. So economics and employment becomes a very important factor to understand before we understand migration and diaspora. Gurpreet?
very clear, sir. Understood. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. Any other question?
So Vinod here.
Yeah, Vinod.
So you were mentioning a lot about the importance of economics and migration. So
Correct.
if people are moving from one place to another place for an economic benefit, is that considered as a forced migration or it is not considered as forced migration?
That technically is an non-forced migration. Forced migration is when, let's say, there's a natural calamity and you have no choice. There is a political instability, there is insurgency, you have no choice. That's forced migration. Otherwise, it's a non-forced migration because you have a choice to migrate or not to migrate. But if you look at it another way, let's say if there is poverty and there is no hope for getting, money from any source, and you have to perforce move, then it almost is like a forced migration.
Sure, sir. That's what I was thinking. I mean,
Correct. But again, listen, that's what I keep telling about academics and scholarly pursuits. It's how you define it and how you look at it. What is the perspective? But again, they say by far the forced one is political persecution or natural calamity, climate change. These typically fall into the forced migration part. The rest is a choice that one takes.
sure, sir. Thank you.
But if you define it, as I said, in case of the fact that there is a backward region, there is poverty, there is no industry, there is no way of getting an income, there is no government intervention in terms of food, then you are forced to migrate. There is no choice.
Got it, sir.
For example, again, an example, Uttarakhand, there is a lot of these ghost villages where people are forced to migrate where there's no work.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? So I was also looking, yeah, while you're thinking of a question, I was also looking that you are coming from different places. So if you're in different places and you see, something in terms of a local enterprise. For example, I was talking to Bashir and I said in Kashmir there is a lot of local handicrafts which is done at a household level. Uh, so in case you come across something of this side and you would like to present about that into this class, we could, every week or whenever you have, earmark 5 to 10 minutes for you to tell about, that specific sector of particular handicraft. If Jyoti is a Jyoti, in Banaras, possibly about Banarsi saris or a particular handicraft, a particular industry, what is the status of this industry? A little small presentation, if you would like to put it out. That way, you get to know about various sectors as well as various places or industries which are there and what is happening. So if that anybody would like to do, create a 5 minute presentation and would like to present it in the class, that would be a good perspective and a value add to our understanding of labor and migration and so on and so forth.
Yes, sir, I'm working on that. I will present. It may take me
Sure.
1 or 2 weeks.
Sure. Whenever you
Uh.
can, if you can, whenever you can, and if you would like to, it will be a good value add. As I said, the idea of the class, we are not in an undergrad or a grad class, even though it's an MA course. All you people are, you have learned, you are experienced, and you have experiential knowledge and information, and everybody has something different to share. So it becomes a very good way of conversations as well as understanding, besides doing the course and passing the examination and getting a degree or a diploma, whatever it is. And the second thing that I wanted to talk, which I was talking to people who had come in earlier, we are looking at how to promote this course, migration and diaspora, the MA and the PG course, using social media. So in case you are on Instagram, you would like to put a post or make a reel. Uh, uh, think about a small copy for 30 seconds where you can come out, for example, when we are talking. So a small reel where you are saying that there is this course, which is an IGNU, it's on migration and diaspora, and a small copy of 30 seconds, 45 seconds, which you can post, and then we can all share it in our various social media handles so that more and more people are aware about this course, which helps the course and helps the university and brings in more people and more perspective. Remember, at the end of the day, it's the perspective which enhances our understanding of the of various aspects of the course. Any thoughts on that, guys? Okay. So Kartikeya, as we talked about, if you can think of a few copies, you share it on WhatsApp group, or you can share it directly with me, and then I can put it on the WhatsApp group for people to share it.
Sure, sir. I'll look into that.
What the hell
Yeah.
is this? Hang on. Damn. Okay. Right. So if there is nothing, there is one more message. Hang on. This one. Sure, sir. Okay, perfect. So if there's nothing else, we'll meet each other next Saturday at 3 p.m. For the next unit of MDI 007. Well, you have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful week ahead. Thanks and bye-bye.